Good evening, everyone. On behalf of CFA Society India, I welcome all the participants to today's webinar titled Investment Writing in Digital Age. I would like to take a moment to give a special welcome to our audience, which has joined us around the world from various remote locations. I am Abhishek Loonker, volunteer with CFA Society India. In my day job, I work as a director with the private equity firm Ascent Capital. I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Before I introduce our esteemed speaker, let me announce few housekeeping announcements. Today's webinar is scheduled for 90 minutes. I repeat, 90 minutes because we have been having 60 minutes webinar. This will include Q&A session as well. We will be leaving enough time for Q&A after the presentation, so please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation. You can do so by clicking on the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen and typing your questions in the box. I sincerely request all the people to put the questions only in Q&A box and not on the chat. We generally end up avoiding questions in the chat box. So please make sure that you put your questions in the Q&A link. This webinar presentation will be available to you after the session. You can get the link in the chat box at the end of the session. We value your feedback. Feedback is of utmost importance to us. It helps us in building the future content appropriately. So I request all of you to complete the evaluation survey before you sign off. The feedback poll will be reflected on your screen at the end of the session. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Paul McCaffrey. Paul is the editor of Enterprising Investor at CFA Institute. Previously, he served as an editor at the H.W. Wilson Company. His writings have appeared in Financial Planning and DailyFinance, among other publications. He holds a BA in English from Vassar College and an MA in Journalism from the City University of New York Graduate School of Journalism. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul McCaffrey, over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Abhishek. Well, thanks everybody for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time. Greetings from New York. It's been crazy couple of months for everybody around the world, but just glad we're able to connect on this level digitally and hopefully sometime in person. But anyway, let me just walk you through my presentation. I'm going to share my screen, give you a few pointers just in terms of the writing process. And let's see if this should work from the beginning. So yeah, let me just start investment writing in the digital age. As far as Abhishek said, my background, I've worked in a number of different platforms, first in magazines, then newspapers, trade publications, reference publishing. So I've been through the ringer effectively, just experimenting in a number of different forms. And for the past 5 years, give or take, I've been editing Enterprising Investor at CFA Institute. I hope you all subscribe. If not, please do. It's a very robust platform. We're very proud of the engagement we're getting. We just passed 12,500,000 lifetime views, 25,000 subscribers. We get about 125,000 visits a month. But what I value most about it is just that it's a community. Particularly for CFA charter holders, over the years we've had over 180 contribute their thought leadership, their ideas. And it really spurs some good discussions, gets a lot of good ideas out there from all over the world. And in the financial blogosphere, we generally have an impact. Our stuff has been picked up by Bloomberg, by the Financial Times, and other publications as well. So while stuff doesn't always go viral, it stands a good chance of getting an audience. And particularly these days with the world as crazy as it is, the past couple of months, it's nice to have a strong digital platform for people to get their ideas out there. We gave everybody an assignment at the outset to write an author's biography, autobiography of their sort of writing history. I figured I'd share mine with you a little bit. These are some of the writers who have inspired me. Dostoevsky, Shakespeare, pretty obvious choice, Shakespeare. But but yeah, they really, from an early age, I picked up books and never really put them down, and knew that I think that was how I wanted to communicate with the larger world, just through writing. And Enterprising Investor particularly has been a strong, it's really helped, me kind of clarify my thoughts on finance and markets, and how they can better serve society, I think. And that is certainly one of the mission of CFA Institute, and something we like to emphasize on the blog as well. I think just briefly, in terms of the autobiography, the writer's autobiography everybody wrote, really some interesting stuff. Srinivas, a colleague from CFA Institute, he ran a lexical analysis on your contributions. And Srinivas, do you mind if I turn it over to you for a few minutes, just to kind of walk people through sort of the high level data points?
Sure. So, thank you very much for the contributions. I think there are 32 of you have sent your contributions. The 32nd one I got just a few minutes back, so I couldn't add it to the analysis. But in general, all of the contributions were very well written. So what we'll do is, at the end of it, we'll just present a machine learning analysis of what you have presented. For this particular workshop, what Paul said is, given the paucity of time, we just took 3 parameters. The first parameter is lexical diversity. The second parameter is sentence length. And the third parameter is the number of adverbs used as a percentage of total words in the document. So what I mean by lexical diversity is how many different types of words you have been using in the vocabulary that you have sent. Okay, so a low score on lexical diversity is quite good, because compared to the entire document, when the number of unique words are in the denominator. The second is with regard to the sentence length, and it's not a given that shorter sentences are always good, but at least for beginner level people, and I include myself in that category. The shorter the sentences are better, especially for Twitter and stuff like that, right? LinkedIn, where you get very limited space. In Bloomberg, if you recollect, there are only 11 lines on a Bloomberg graph. And the last one was adverbs. So we avoid using adverbs. This was especially given by Paul. I couldn't add the fourth parameter that Paul gave, which was passive voice. So Paul doesn't like passive voice. I avoided that. So I'll quickly show you, Behzad, I think, ranked the topmost in across all 31 of the participants who gave their inputs. And this is what you will look at when you, I'll share my screen very quickly. This is what you look at when you actually get the results. And this is what Behzad's thing looks like. Just give me a second. Share screen. For a moment, I'll share my screen, Paul. If that's
okay. So yeah, I'll get at it real quick. There we go.
So can you see my screen here? This is I've divided it into 3 parts. The lexical diversity is relatively low for Behzad, and the sentence length is at 21 words per sentence is not that low, but it is still, relatively speaking, quite good. I have added sentiment analysis, which is on a score of 0 to 1, -1 to +1. Nearer 0, you are like Mr. Spock, and very positive sentiment or very negative sentiment, you can make out, like for example, if you do a Twitter analysis of Trump's sentiment, they are mostly negative. Spelling checks, there are 3 spellings. It's very difficult to get spell checks because we use proper nouns. And then subjectivity is, a score near 0 is a research paper where everything is based on facts, and a score near 1 is, based on others' opinions. So good score generally may not be as good. And then these are the figures of speech where I've given the absolute count as well as the percentages. the lower the number of adverbs, it is good. So he's got 3.3%, adverb rates. And I've given a word cloud. I could have added other topic analysis as well, but this is what we have got for Bazaar. So that's it. I'll send through Shraddha to all of you what your document look like. It may be useful to look at this analysis and look at other such, look at your other documents. There might be online tools as well, because the SEO engines and many other engines will probably pick up some of these parameters. Over to you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Yeah, I do have to say I was really pleased with how good all the writing was, and I'm sad I only got a chance to go through a handful of them, but I'm interested in reading them all, and if time permits, hopefully getting you all some feedback. Because yeah, just I was really impressed with the writing, and good content, good stories. So yeah, I'm looking forward to really digging into those. But anyway, just as to what we're going to do for now, this is sort of the structure of things going forward over the next hour, give or take. Just in terms of what you'll need, something to write with and on, whether you want to do that on a keyboard or with pen and paper, whatever works. Just going to have a couple of short writing exercises just to walk you through investment writing in the digital age, essentially. And while it's certainly hard to kind of go through all the architecture of what good writing is, how to do it, it's an intensive process. I'm still I've been working at it for a good 25 years at this point, and still quite a lot to learn, and I'm always learning. So improvement is it's a constant process. So patience is key. But I just want to walk you through a few points I just want to make. One thing you'll hear a lot, people will say, particularly video people, podcast people, print is dead. I don't know if you all saw Ghostbusters back in the day, but that was one of the lines. And I think it's wrong. It's not correct. I think writing is still the most efficient and permanent way to communicate. If you just think about technology now, we have all these different ways of communicating, whether through video, through podcasts, but those take a little bit more time and energy to produce. They take a little bit more skills, software, and time, ultimately. And it also requires more from the audience. If you're listening to a podcast, you need earbuds maybe, or you need silence from the people around you. So I think the ask of an audience with writing is a lot lower than it is for video or podcasts. And generally, I think the best videos, the best podcasts, it all starts with great writing. Being able to work with text, being able to communicate clearly and succinctly. Those are the things that matter most in any medium. But writing is just one that we've been doing it for a long time, and I think whatever the skeptics might say, I think it's going to be here for a while. That said, don't expect to make any money off it, because it's a distinctly unprofitable industry, but it's still the best way to get your message out. And I think just some evidence of that is Howard Marks, Warren Buffett, great writers, great thinkers, and that's how they communicate, whether it's the Berkshire Hathaway quarterly reports or Howard Marks's memos, Oaktree Capital. It's all print. It's all they don't do their main means of communication is through the written word. And if it's good enough for Howard Marks and Warren Buffett, it's good enough for me. So anyway, moving on, just the big pointers. These things are, practice is essential. Really, the time you spend behind the wheel, the time you spend staring at an empty screen, figuring things out, that really is the most important thing. There are shortcuts, but it's better if you learn them than are taught them. And yeah, there's no substitute for putting in the effort. Practice. And after that, cutting. Always be ready to cut your word count down. In the digital age, I feel you really have to capture people's attention early and with as few words as possible, because they have infinite choices. They can move on. and pick anything out that they want. So so it's good to keep things short on the whole. And then revisions. This is one of the things that's very hard to do, very hard to learn, is just messing with structure, figuring out, is this the best way I should arrange things? And I think a good part of it is not being too tied to, too in love with your text. One has to be ready to adapt and change regularly, and you know, to be comfortable with it. You know, there's a number of different ways to get your point across, and you know, you just kind of have to figure out the best way. Another point.
A 60-second question over here may help people. Given your experience, you know, what was the biggest pain point for you, and how did you improve? You know, from on that biggest pain point when you started your career and now where you are at.
You know, I have to say the biggest challenge, and it still is I think, you know, doubt. You know, there's always the idea of like, is what I have to say important? Do people want to hear it? And you know, with so many choices out there, is it worth saying? And I think that's something everybody kind of has to get over. It's like, what you do, if you have an idea, and you should get it out there, and let the audience decide if it's important. You know, that's always a struggle, I think. Just running your ideas through your mind and saying, okay, will this work? Is this something people will be interested in? And sometimes they're not. We put out a lot of stories over the years that I figured were going to be big hits, and they just kind of fall with a clunk. Nobody really reads them. But then there are other stories that I don't expect much from. I'm like, oh, this isn't that big this isn't that great a story. But then it goes viral, and you know, gets picked up by, you know, Bloomberg or something, and you're like, huh, I guess you know, my judgment was a little bit off there. But yeah, in terms of other pointers, I think a key one thing that I try to keep in mind, and I need to do more myself, is just to read your writing aloud, see what it sounds like, the rhythm, the pacing. You know, in terms of like, you know, horses or whatever, they have gaits. You know, you don't want to walk and you don't want to gallop. A walk is too slow. Gallop's probably too fast. So you want to stay in a good rhythm that moves people at a steady pace, keeps their interest, and gets them to where they want to go. And that, you know, again, reading it aloud is probably the best way to do that. And then another big pointer I have is just generally openings and closings are really important. You know, just click on here real quick. This article was written by two charter holders out in Chicago. It's about ESG investing, which we all know is a huge you know, huge phenomenon these days. And you know, they're both great writers, and they gave, you know, as an editor, you really appreciate what they gave you. You know, it was ESG investing. They had this metaphor about cake. And so, you know, that kind of creates this visual imagery that you can kind of sell the story online. And they open with, you know, this metaphor, and then they close with it as well. If you go down to the end, you know, they return to the cake.
Did you meant to share the article?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it not sharing?
No, on the screen, or yeah, because we can't see it on the screen.
Oh, you can. All right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess. All right, maybe. Yeah. Can you see my screen now?
No, Paul. We can see only the presentation, not yet.
Okay. Well, I'll stick with the presentation. Yeah, just these technical difficulties take some ironing out. But yeah, I mean, the point is, effectively, if you open with a metaphor, in this case, ESG investing, you know, eating cake, it works to close with that. It kind of ties things up and returns people to your original point, and you kind of end with a flourish. So it sticks in people's memory, and they're not going to forget it. You know, and certainly with that piece, ESG, we've produced a lot of ESG related content over the past over the past several years, and not all of it resonates, but stuff that's structured like that tends to it speaks for itself. If it's structured well, argued well, you'll generally have a good chance of getting an audience. And finally, one last piece of advice: everyone needs editors. And to paraphrase Daniel Kahneman, a good editor is someone who likes you but doesn't care about your feelings. They'll tell you the truth. And if a particular sentence doesn't work, hopefully they'll make that clear to you in hopefully as nice a way as possible, but also in a way that that you understand. And just where are we here? One last point I wanted to make as far as broad kind of advice. I mean, we're all on our iPhones all the time. We're all kind of scrolling on desktop. Accessing content through search engines, through social media, through emails from friends, associates. So people effectively have an infinite number of choices out there in terms of what to dedicate their attention to. So you really have to differentiate yourself very quickly. And I use the 50 character rule. That's basically several words, give or take. Generally, you want to capture people's attention, engage their interest, and hold them for the length of the article. And you really have to capture that attention and engage that interest within the first several words, or you've lost them. They're going to move on somewhere else. So with that in mind, titles are important. Your opening line is very important. Try to engage people as quickly as possible. Now, how to do that? These are some of my pet peeves, which hopefully will shed some light on what I like to see in terms of writing. If you look at this sentence here, excess words, prepositional phrases, adverbs, passive voice. Those are things that it's a good way to don't do them if you can avoid them. Don't use them. They tend to add excess words, more verbiage, and they don't necessarily get your point across. Just as an example, this sentence here, according to the reporter, over roughly the last year and a half, lively discussions and debates were engaged around negative interest rates were engaged in by central bankers. Now, these opening lines, it's just lots and lots of text, lively over roughly, lots of adverbs, lots of prepositional phrases. But really what this sentence is about is central bankers and negative interest rates. So, just moving on to the next sentence, we could have said that much quicker. Just central bankers have debated negative interest rates for the last 18 months. Quick to the point. There isn't all this kind of excessive verbiage around who's saying what, time frames. Those things are secondary to the main actors, which in this case are central bankers and negative interest rates. So just building on that point, prioritize what's important, which means put it first. If Warren Buffett is saying something, your sentence should probably start Warren Buffett. Just a few examples here. I believe this was from this is in reference to a Reuters article from a couple of years back. And it's about the fall in global stocks at the time, and they attribute that to rising geopolitical tensions. So those are the two subjects. Those are the two, those are the critical subjects in question. So the reporters which were referenced, they really aren't as important. It's the subject is global stocks and political tensions. So stick with that. And just, following up by rising geopolitical tensions caused global stocks to fall earlier this month. Much quicker way, much more direct way of saying the same thing. So that's sort of the main point. Be as direct and concise as you can. Get to the point. And make the point as quickly and succinctly as possible. And then just continuing with my pet peeves, over long sentences, they can usually be broken up. Check the quotes. Make sure if you're saying Einstein said it, do double check that, Google and find a reputable source. it's amazing how many bogus quotes are circulating around the internet, whether it's from, in the United States, it's Mark Twain. There's Mark Twain, Einstein. Most of the stuff that's attributed to them, there's actually no record of them saying. And I think that applies to just facts in general. If you say something happened in 1976, say, just do check and make sure it did happen in 1976, as you say. And also over references, people's attention spans are short. So, obscure references to TV shows or movies, it's like keep them to a minimum because they can be very distracting. And finally, check the spelling. Can't emphasize that enough. Warren Buffett is 2 T's, but I can't tell you how many times I've misspelled his name. I've seen other people misspell his name. So yeah, check the spelling. Editors definitely appreciate that. All right, and so now that I've hopefully not driven too many people off, but just wanted to start with an exercise. First thing, clear your head. We're not going to be graded. This is just an exercise to kind of emphasize what, for enterprising investor, what sort of things we're looking for, and how to create them, the sort of problems we want to address and identify, address, and hopefully give solutions to. So these are 2 of the most popular enterprising investor articles of all time. One is the top 5 accounting mistakes analysts make. The other is how to read financial news, tips from portfolio managers. Now, each of these articles address problems that I think every investment professional has on some level. On one hand, what do you read? There's so much information out there. You can read endlessly. So it's a question of finding the good sources and sticking with them. And at the same time, in the first article, Accounting Mistakes, Jason Voss, a colleague, one of the pieces of advice he got early in his career was that a lot of analysts don't have much of a background in accounting. They don't understand it as well as they should. And so if you want to differentiate yourself, focus on honing your accounting skills. So both those things, identifying these problems are, that's the first part of the equation. There's a problem hiding in plain sight. They identify it, but then they bring it to the next level and they come up with solutions of how to address those problems, and they do it very effectively. And that is kind of based on the success of these articles. They really got their point across. And so in terms of the writing exercise, what are the problems hiding in plain sight? For the next 10 minutes, what's an obvious and glaring issue in the investment industry that everybody knows about but rarely discusses? Think about what that might be. Think in broad strokes. What is the problem? What are the consequences, and how can you address it? And finally, just to reemphasize, this is mostly a thinking exercise. If you get a few sentences out of this that you can live with, and potentially a direction you might want to head in to fill this out over the long run, that counts as a success. So I'll just set my timer, 10 minutes. It's 8:32 in New York. I think it's, what time is it over there? It's probably 6-ish, I would think. So yeah, give yourself 10 minutes and see what you can come up with.
Paul, do you mind keeping the last slide open so that people can reread it?
Oh, sure, sure. My apologies.
Yes, thank you. Paul, one quick question. Do you expect participants to send what they have already written?
Oh, no, they don't. I mean, if you want to, do send it, but mostly I think it's just to give you an idea of what might be a good story to write. So yeah, don't feel like you have to send it in, but if you want feedback, certainly do. And yeah, another question on font style. You know, in-house, I like Arial myself, but you can use your judgment. Arial, Times New Roman, Palatino, Garamond. Those are all some of the fonts I like. I think a lot of it is personal preference, though. So long as it's clear, that should be fine.
Okay.
All right, we got about a minute left, so think about finishing up. All right. So hopefully that went okay. Hopefully you came up with some good ideas that could potentially turn into an article. So now just pretend for a moment that it's no longer your story. That and now you have to kind of put on your editor's glasses and take a step back and reread what you've written and determine what needs to be fixed, what works, what doesn't. So just take a few minutes. This is a little rubric of a little code of PCI: provocative, confusing, interesting. Provocative causes a reaction. Hopefully, what you say, hopefully your potential story is going to make people think. So is provocative. Hopefully, it's not confusing. Hopefully, you've communicated what you meant to say in a straightforward and clear manner, and hopefully it's interesting. So just give however long the paragraph you've written, the 2 paragraphs, the several sentences, whatever it is, just go through it and code, with the words, with the phrase. If something's provocative, if something reads confusing to you, if something reads interesting, just use that PC or I code to indicate what works, what doesn't, and then go from there.
And when you actually do this, if you can give yourself a score with a simple equation where you say the number of provocative and interesting. Suppose you've got 2 or 3 provocative pieces and 1 interesting piece and 1 confusing piece, then you can add the provocative and interesting and subtract the confusing number to give you a total score, to give yourself a total score. So Paul, 2 minutes for this or 5 minutes for this?
Yeah, 2 minutes should be good. All right, and that's about 2 minutes. So hopefully you've seen what works. You've identified where you can improve, what works, what doesn't, and hopefully you have a good idea for a story that you may want to flesh out and potentially contribute to Enterprising Investor when you've finished it up.
Just by way of curiosity, Paul, is it okay to ask to the audience, anybody who's got a score of more than 10 can put in the chat?
Oh, yeah. Put that in the chat. If anybody has a score higher than 10.
And if not higher than 10, between 5 and 10?
A couple of guys who have got 3, but I haven't seen anybody getting 5+ so far.
Okay.
Gaurav Somani says he has got 3 points for P, 1 for C, and 1 for I. So
Okay.
maybe
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Well, I guess we'll move on to the next step. Hopefully through this we've come up with a potential idea for a story, and let's imagine we've written it and are ready to get it out. We think we have something that's ready for an audience. We're happy with how we've communicated our points. So the question now is, how do you get it out? How do you get an audience for it? How do you get people to read read your ideas and think about them? So that, how do you distribute? How do you build an audience? Social media these days is huge. You can also publish on various websites, Weebly, Medium, WordPress. Those are very off-the-shelf kind of solutions. You can sign up now and create your own site, have it up and running in a matter of hours, effectively. Or you can pitch to an established publication. Enterprising Investors certainly at your not at your, I shouldn't say at your disposal, but we're definitely interested in hearing what you have to say. Seeking Alpha is another major player and does a lot of publishes a lot of different voices, so that could be an option as well. And how do you get your message out there? There's several different ways. Search engines are huge. Generally, Google is where you stand. Searches is perhaps the main component of whether or not you get an audience. And then within that, you also have Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. If you Enterprising Investor, we have a subscriber list. We send out a weekly email to about our 25,000 subscribers, give or take. That just went out, I think, in the last hour. So hopefully some of you have subscribed and gotten it. But that's the subscription model. And so, there are all these different ways to distribute your content. I think, it's a cliche in investing that diversification is, one of the best tools you have, both for portfolios and I think for getting your message out in the digital age, which is just to say, get on all these platforms. You want to emphasize Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. You want to have email subscribers. As many outlets as you have to get your message out, the better. And social media, particularly, I found I was actually a late adopter of it. Sort of came from a pre-social media generation, but once I picked it up, I was really quite. I'm quite amazed at what you can accomplish with it, how it improves your writing. It forces you to, to make your point quickly, succinctly. In the case of Twitter, in 280 characters, which isn't always easy, but is a good way to help you hone your message and cut down on your words and say things as succinctly as possible. So I just want to walk you through the strengths and weaknesses of these various platforms. Twitter is obviously one of the big three social media platforms. It's a great way to get your message out. I would say I haven't connected as far as all the social media platforms out there. It's the one that comes least naturally to me. It's very conversational. It's very informal. It is very reciprocal as well. It's like if you can retweet somebody's message, and usually they'll tend to return the favor. One hand washes the other in some respects, which is it helps to build an audience, and there is that kind of transactional quality to it, which is both a help and a hindrance, I'd say. And the viral factor is real for it. It happens very rarely, but if your particular tweet resonates in the Twitterverse, as it were, you will get a huge audience, and it's pretty incredible what can happen when you go viral. That says it happens very rarely. I don't know what goes into getting it there. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of stuff that I don't know, or that nobody knows really, but every now and then something really does capture the zeitgeist, as it were, and goes viral. Now the downsides to it is very labor intensive. You'll generally have to post on Twitter 3 to 5 times more than the other platforms just to get a similar amount of traffic and engagement. Also, the character count can be a bit annoying. It does limit how much you can say. And once you publish something, you can't edit it. It's either if you want to change, you either erase it and repost it, or you live with whatever mistake or error you made. And finally, trolls and bots are real. People will, you will be insulted generally, even for things that are completely mundane and inoffensive. There are people out there who will take offense, and the best advice is not to engage. Have a thick skin, stiff upper lip, and just ignore them, because the last thing you want to do is get into a Twitter war with somebody. You generally, it's not worth the effort. I think that's a fairly and I think that's true across the board. Facebook is another. Here we go. Facebook is another one of the big three. That one's easy to use. You have a vast potential audience. It's more Twitter. You'll have a lot of bots. They're not really accounts that are run by actual people. Facebook cuts down much more on that. What I've noticed the past several years, it's not as good a distribution network as it was. It was very strong a few years ago, but I think they may have changed their direction somewhat. And it is not necessarily an idea network. It's mostly a place for people to keep up with friends and family. So, that's a different kind of audience than, if you want to talk to an investment professional audience, Facebook may not be the best way to access them. That said, you can still get a lot of engagement from it. And finally, there's LinkedIn. This one is, I think, the strongest. It's really come a long way in the last couple of years. As a distribution platform, it's amazing. And generally everyone's professional. They're civil. The dialogue is very very professional. It's a great platform all around. The one downside of that is when everybody's got their kind of professional caps on. It's not always as the give and take isn't as always. I guess it's a little more formal, is how I'd say it. So that kind of limits how if one really wants to get unconventional or provocative, LinkedIn may not be the best platform. That said, as far as distribution networks go for enterprising investor, I think LinkedIn is now our strongest social media platform. as far as distribution. So make sure you get on all three of these. It is essential. And just a few tips, sort of broad strokes on that. This is Blair Ducanay. She's a charter holder down in New Orleans, Louisiana. She's very much a presence on Twitter. Has a great social media presence. Lots of engagement. She has a very basic rubric. She posts 3 times a day on Twitter. At least this is what it was a couple of years ago. I haven't checked up in a while, but I think having a kind of framework like this, okay, I'm going to post 3 times a day on Twitter, 3 times a week on Facebook and LinkedIn. Having a plan like that is very helpful, and it keeps you engaged. It keeps your audience aware of the new material you're producing, the new messages you're getting out. And to be sure, there isn't any one hard and fast rule with this. Everyone engages with different platforms to a greater or lesser degree. For me, I find LinkedIn particularly helpful. Facebook and Twitter's really, I'm on it, but I haven't connected with it to the same extent. So play to your strengths, focus on the ones that you're good at, the ones you connect with the most, and really try to log some hours on these. You'll find, and the conversations work, the exchange of ideas. It's a good way to kind of hone your message, to think about ways that ideas you may have missed, and that exchange of ideas is really effective, and having that input can really help your writing and just crafting your message in the long run. And then from there, as far as getting your message out, this is a bit of a switch up, but the title of your article is the most important thing for SEO purposes, for social media sharing, every aspect of it. What people are going to see ultimately is that those first several words of the title. So you want to make it good, and you want to make it accurate, and you want to make it catchy. This is one we did a few weeks ago. Lawrence Siegel, who's works at I forget it. He's the CFA Research Foundation. He's sort of the executive in charge of that, and he wrote a take on the coronavirus epidemic and the situation in the United States. His argument was basically that the economic metrics we use to measure these events are old. GDP, unemployment, they sort of originated, as a way to measure the Great Depression. In those days, they didn't really have metrics to measure this kind of unprecedented economic phenomena. So if you don't have the metrics to measure it, you got to come up with new ones. And his point in this article was just that with the epidemic as it is, GDP and unemployment, they don't reflect reality. They're not a good way to gauge what's happening. And then, just the initial don't panic. It's a good way to engage people's attention. It's not, the opposite, panic, would probably not work as well. But you grab people by the collar effectively, and then you tell them what it's about. What is this about? It's about coronavirus, GDP, and unemployment. Everybody knows now exactly what, they have a pretty clear idea of what the story is going to be about. Hopefully they've been grabbed by the collar, and if it's of interest, they'll read it. Of course, accuracy is important. You don't want to mislead. Clickbait is a real thing. People just want to get clicks however they can. But if you want to, build a real audience, you have to be accurate, and you don't want to mislead. Couple of tips on search engine optimization. What works for Google search. There are a few tricks. Generally, the search engines don't show their cards, and they adjust their algorithms. We'll never quite know what their formula is and so forth, but certain things that tend to work consistently over the years. Our titles in the form of lists, 10 rules for forecasting. That's one of our strongest performers over the last several years. And then questions. Warren Buffett, the greatest factor investor of all time, question mark. that really got a lot of engagement for us as well, and probably not just well, I mean, Warren Buffett's in the title, which generally means it's going to do well, but also I think we phrased it pretty well. So with that in mind, I just want to give you all a chance. This is the second exercise. There's an article written by Saurabh Mukherjee, I believe is how you pronounce his name. One of the best articles we've had over the last couple of years. A contributor from India. His story was about the Nifty 50, and what he noticed was this index was not performing very well. Whereas the Indian economy was, growing by leaps and bounds. So if this benchmark index isn't reflecting the larger economy, what does that mean? And also in the story, he made the connection with the S&P 500 in the United States, and again, it was a different kind of disjunction. In the United States, the S&P 500 was going through the roof. But the larger economy wasn't. So it seemed like the markets in both India and the United States were not reflecting the larger economy in different ways. So what follows is I'll show you that article. I want everybody to give it a read and think about how they would message it on social media. How would they title it? And how would they get it across on social media? So over the next 15 to 20 minutes, read the article, give it a headline, with those basic components of SEO practices I've just given, what's it about, what's the issue, come up with a title that covers that, and then craft the social media messaging. I think one Facebook post, one LinkedIn post, and 2 different tweets, say.
Paul, sorry to interrupt. Just a quick time check. We have already 63 minutes into the session.
All right. Okay. Actually, let's switch this up then. I'll everybody give this a read while you can. I'll keep it here for a few moments and just give it a read for like 5 minutes. I'll switch the page up shortly, and then I'll walk you through the social media messaging we did and just give you some ideas on best practices and what worked, what didn't. All right, I'll just give a few more seconds for everybody to finish the first slide. All right, I'll just give you another minute or so to finish this one off. Okay, so hopefully you all got a good read of this article. As I said, one of our best performers over the last couple of years. And this is how we did the social media messaging. This is the first one. This is a tweet from the CFA Institute main handle. This is a tweet from the Enterprising Investor handle. And here we just kind of followed SEO best practices, forming it a question: why is India's benchmark Nifty 50? Presumably, readers in the United States, Canada, may not know what the Nifty 50 is, or they may have an idea, or it may be something else. There was the Nifty 50 companies in the United States as well. So, we identified the Nifty 50 as India's benchmark index. And it underperformed relative to the larger Indian economy. We identify Saurabh, the author. We also identify his company, Marcellus Invest. Presumably Marcellus will have some Twitter followers, and if they see themselves tagged, they may give us a retweet and hopefully drive more traffic to the article. And then we also identify at Enterprising, that's the Enterprising Investor handle. So ultimately, the idea here is to, we establish what the article's about. We tag the people who have an interest in perhaps retweeting this message, both at Enterprising Investor and Marcellus Invest. And then, we have the lead image, which is, a visual of India. It's a pretty compelling image. That's one thing I've always tried to do with Enterprising Investor. There are different ways people engage with content. You have text and you have the image. So try to make it as compelling as possible. Give people pause. If they're scrolling on their mobile and they see a compelling image, that'll get them to stop. That'll be the way to grab their collar, and maybe they can. And maybe you can convince them to go deeper and read the article you have. So these are the two tweets. This is the tweet from CFA Society India, similar kind of treatment. They give the title, the author, and his firm, so covers all the bases. And next to that, we have the LinkedIn posting. As you can see, the messages are pretty similar. The story is Nifty 50, why it no longer reflects the Indian economy. So that's pretty much touched on in each social media post in different ways, certainly. And just here, you can see, we've tagged Saurabh and we've tagged Marcellus Investments. And that's the way to do it. You want, the social aspect of it is to make sure you're mentioning the people who are involved, and hopefully they can amplify the message on their end. And you can build a larger audience. One thing I wanted to point out, just in terms of impact. So this is the CFA Institute Twitter handle. You can see 19 likes, 2 retweets. This is the Enterprising Investor handle, 2 likes, 1 retweet. Obviously, the CFA Institute handle is much more of a following. But as you get down, here's CFA Society India. That's a very robust, Twitter audience as well. But once you get to LinkedIn, you can see this is a lot more than these Twitter. LinkedIn is getting a lot more engagement than Twitter, so that's something to keep in mind. It seemed, particularly in this forum, it seems to be a better way to distribute content, at least from the CFA Institute handle. Now here is the Facebook from the CFA Institute handle, and this is from March 16th, 2019, so it's a while ago. But you can see 911 engagements. That's almost good several hundred people have definitely read this article. They've clicked on it. So that's a pretty powerful engagement rate. So I just kind of want to emphasize the power that these platforms can have if you use them properly, to really get your message out there. And yeah, just keep that in mind. Social media, it can help you as a writer, and it can really help you build an audience. So these days you have to be on it to get your message out there. So if you haven't joined these platforms yet, I'd recommend you do it and try to get a handle on things. It does take a while. I'm still learning myself. And I find with a lot of these things, you can always improve. For example, this tweet from Enterprising Investor, we don't tag Marcellus Invest. That was a mistake. But you can learn from the mistake, and hopefully the next time improve and do it better. So anyway, that concludes the big part of the presentation. I hope just with the first exercise, particularly that maybe you have an idea for a potential story. I would love it if you contributed or pitched us on it. We want to get more voices from India. And I think CFA Institute released a report fairly recently, The Investment Professional of the Future. And, it really made the point that India could very well be the future of the investment industry. So we want to hear your voices. We want to hear your perspective. And so consider Enterprising Investor a possible outlet for your thought leadership. We'd love to read what you're thinking. And so, yeah, don't be strangers. And with that, go to our website. You can contribute. Or pitch us. Admittedly, we're a bit buried at the moment. This epidemic has all our contributors have something to say now. So we can't promise a swift response, but like I said, it's a priority for us to get your voices included. So do keep us in mind. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions, Abhishek. And thank you all for your attention. I really appreciate it. It's an honor, and thank you, Srinivas, Abhishek, Shraddha, everybody, Vidu, of course, too. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was indeed a very insightful presentation. May I request you to stop the screen share?
Yeah, I'll get out of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, a gentle reminder on Q&A. Kindly please put all your questions in the Q&A window, which is at the bottom of your screen. Till the time questions queue up, may I request Shraddha to just show the feedback poll on the screen. Request all the participants to participate in the feedback. As mentioned earlier, feedback is extremely important, and we will help and devise much better content based on your feedback. So there are a lot of questions coming in, Paul. I will just wait for a few more seconds before we start. I'm just giving people time to participate in the feedback poll. Okay, Paul, we have a couple of questions from one participant named Meera Siva. She's asking, if the article takes 100% time, how can one allocate time between the ideas, research, structure, sentence, rewrite, review? I mean, does it vary with the article size? How do you break up for smaller versus larger ones?
Yeah, that's it's very kind of subjective. I would say every article is different. There's a sort of a different formula to every article you do. I think the basic idea is to have the idea, have the general kind of thesis, what you want to say, and then find the research that can support that, and then figure out a way to structure it. I mean, you want the idea and you want the data to back up the idea, and then how you arrange it it's, I mean, I guess one bit of advice I tend to give, and I'm not sure how helpful it is, but a good first sentence and a good last sentence, and, have some good research data in there that's robust, and weave it together, as well as you can. But again, I can't emphasize, that first sentence and the last sentence are important. But yeah, it is a constant balancing act between the research and the craft of writing. And I think every writer sort of has a different take on things. I'm sort of more craft oriented. I think Srinivas is certainly more data oriented than I am, based on his mastery of Python and my lack of mastery of Adobe. So yeah, it's a balancing act, and everyone kind of has a different formula. So yeah, a lot of variations.
Okay, thank you. You did mention about the opening and the ending, and you repeated just now as well. So what's your stance on statements that lay out the background for your idea, especially when you're talking about complex ideas?
Yeah, that's one of the things. I mean, I noticed certainly with a lot of the peer-reviewed journal articles, they'll start with the abstract, and sort of tie everything together, in a very, they'll give the gist of the article right off the bat. And I have no problem with that approach in general. I mean, for peer-reviewed material, I think that's how they do it. That's the way they do it. For enterprising investor, I feel like that's not really our approach. Generally, I say, we tend to start articles off with like a question, like, for Saurabh's article, for example, it's like, why is the Nifty 50, why does it no longer reflect the Indian economy? That lays it all out there pretty quickly. It's like, this is the question we're going to address. We're not giving you the answer right off the bat, but it does give a fair indication of what the story is going to be about and how it's going to be addressed. So yeah, I appreciate the sort of abstract beginning where it's like, listen, where you kind of lay it all out. But for enterprising investor, we tend to kind of work that out in the article rather than right off the top.
Okay. Mira had a follow-up question that, are there any working rules when being a co-author with someone?
Not really. Not as far as I know. I mean, all those kind of relationships are unique, I think. And there's always a different interplay. And usually it's between the authors, I think, to work it out. Certainly there are, there's also some conventions as to whose name goes first. Is it alphabetical? And I don't have any hard and fast rules on that. But if the writers have preferences, I usually defer to them. But yeah, it's definitely something to work out. I mean, those relationships can be complicated, and you do want to make sure that everybody's doing their part. That said, it's like most partnerships aren't 50-50, so there's always a little bit of potential for tension, I think.
Okay. Our audience, and especially some of the members of our society, there are a lot of aspiring writers. So are there any common traps for aspiring writers which you would want to highlight, which they should be careful?
I think the only thing I can say is practice. That's really that's the key in anything, is just like time. Malcolm Gladwell has the 10,000 hours. I think what makes you a good investment analyst is the same thing that's going to make you a good writer. Is just, natural talent is important, but natural talent isn't a substitute for time and discipline. And so, yeah, you really, it's something to work at, and it comes more naturally to others. But I'd say that the biggest impediment is just fear, and inertia. Just write as much as you can, whatever it is. If you have an idea, try to work it out on paper. And a lot of times it won't turn into anything. A lot of times you'll be disappointed, but hopefully you'll learn some lessons along the way. And then when you have a different idea, maybe a better idea, you'll be in a better position to communicate it effectively.
Right. So I have few questions which have come in on keeping audience in mind. There are people who are asking, how do you modify your writing for retail investors versus institutional investors? On the other hand, there are people who are talking about how do you write articles for non-financial audience. So maybe if I have to club all together and ask you a simple straight line question, there's always this conflict between how do you order your ideas versus the capability of readers' mind, and how do you solve for this puzzle?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I mean, just following up, it's I mean, one can really get complex with structure. It's just like one's own ideas. Things are very clear in one's head. In your own head, you may know it, but somebody just kind of another person will have no idea where you're coming from, which is why I think SEO is search engines. They have these. It's like a trick. They have the lists and the questions. It's like 10 rules for forecasting. Is Warren Buffett the greatest factor investor of all time? Those things are very simple. And I think you grab people right off. Simple is just generally better. I think you'll have you can communicate complex ideas simply. And I think giving that list, that question structure, it imposes that structure on yourself. When you say 10 rules for forecasting, you're giving yourself a built-in structure to fill out your story, which is very helpful because structure is the hardest thing. So yeah, I would just say in that sense, keep it simple is generally, don't assume your audience will be able to follow along. Even a moderately simple structure may lose a lot of people. So the simpler the better with these things. Certainly it's a little different with academic writing and when you really get into the minutia, but generally for a web audience, the simpler the better. Okay. And certainly, just writing for a retail audience versus investment professionals, it's generally a question of emphasis. With writing for a retail audience versus writing for investment managers, you really just have to change a few words around to communicate the same message. Retail investors are, you just sort of talk to investment managers as though like, this is what your clients are going to be asking you, so be ready for it. Whereas you'd put it to a retail audience sort of by saying like, these are the things you should be thinking about. So it's the question of focus, I would say, the retail versus, the professional audience. I hope that was clear. I think, as you say, with the structure, sometimes things can get overcomplicated. So the simpler, the better. That's the biggest piece of advice I have, I think.
Okay, thank you. An interesting question from Gaurav Somani, professional writing versus ideology-based abstract writing. How can one make both meaningful? Any key areas one should focus on?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, from my perspective, like I've gone through, quite a number of formats and media over the years, from, books and magazine writing to newspapers, weekly newspapers, daily newspapers, all of these, reference books, like these big tomes that would sit in libraries. And, really the lessons are kind of this: if you can write well in one, generally you'll be able to transmit that into another. I mean, it takes some adjusting. But yeah, I think I might be losing my train of thought here. So would you mind repeating that real quick? The question?
Professional writing versus abstract.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, there's basic kind of journalistic, one of our strong components on the blog is just, CFA Institute puts on a lot of events. You have an Aswath Damodaran or a Howard Marks speaking. Whatever they say is going to be very interesting. You can pretty much just translate their page and people will read it. Then there's the more sort of idea-oriented conceptual pieces. And I think there's a space for all of that. I mean, they're different, it's a different medium, different approach, but I guess the only thing is to work at it effectively. And they each have their place, and you can do both. And I think, the key is not to be limited by particular formats or parameters generally.
Okay. There are a couple of questions which have come around enterprising investor, which you manage. People say that, is there any word limit for writing articles there? Are there any other opportunities which Institute provides wherein our audience can write? And the question is both for society and Institute.
Oh, okay. Well, in terms of word count, we don't really have any hard and fast rules. I mean, generally 800, give or take, 800 words is probably our sweet spot, but 1200 is fine. And there are certainly articles that have gone to, 2500 words. And there have been those that have gone to like 600. I think 600 is definitely on the short side. 2500 is stretching it a bit. I think there's, depending on the story, take as long as it takes to communicate it effectively. No hard and fast rules. That said, it is a big ask editorially to turn around a 3,000 word piece, particularly if it's time sensitive. So those are things to keep in mind. I'd say our sweet spot generally is 800 to 1,200 words. And in terms of other opportunities at CFA Institute, that we do have a bunch, and not just in writing. I think enterprising investor particularly, we generally have the ask of an audience for a short article of 800 to 1,200 words it's much lower than a monograph or even a research foundation brief. So one strength of it is just that you can build an audience with enterprising investor, and if you're communicating well and people are enjoying what you're saying and you're building on your ideas, there can be opportunities to go into a longer form. It doesn't happen very often, and there are certainly other opportunities. We've had a bunch of contributors over the last month or so contribute to podcasts, Take 15 podcasts. So I would just say that, there are opportunities across CFA Institute, not just at Enterprising Investor, but Enterprising Investor is probably a good way, to start building an audience and to kind of test your message. If you're getting an audience, if people are engaged, it would seem to suggest that maybe you need to go longer and write something more in depth. So,
can I just add one more thing, two things actually. Writing, you can start writing via LinkedIn and Twitter and, all those forums, and keep writing, be consistent. But as Paul said, enterprising investor, you'll get read by a global audience. So, do attempt that and read the Financial Analyst Journal. I don't find people, our own members, reading the FAJ. So it will give you fodder for thought of how it applies to India. So that was one point. The second point, many of you are thinking about, retail versus investment audience. So one useful advice that Monica Hallan gave me when I was trying to write a financial literacy piece. So she said that if you're writing to the audience for a mint audience, think about it as, telling your daughter, right? So of what you want to say. So if you have the image of a person with whom you're trying to explain your ideas, that might help you when you actually go and write.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Pretend you're explaining it to your grandparent. It's like, simple, direct, not too complicated language, and yeah, that's a great point.
Thanks, Srinivas. Thanks, Paul. We are running out of time, so I will just last two questions. One is, Ravi wants to know, he would want to know whether it is good to write in simple present tense form while explaining a company's past financial performance, or they can refer it using a past tense, which is better from a reader's attention perspective.
I think present is generally the most immediate. I found that can be confusing at times. So yeah, I wouldn't say I have any hard and fast rules on that. I think you can do both. But you do want to emphasize, I mean, you want it to be clear that that things are in the past. So yeah, I think that would be kind of a subjective call, as to what works for the moment, the particular and the particular data that you're communicating.
Okay, and the last one, actually the last two, again, there are some very good questions which are coming in. One on social media. So is there a appropriate number of hashtags which one should use in Twitter, and also how should one assess the quality of an article, whether it is being appreciated through the actual number of views or likes or reactions? What is the right metrics, and what is your view on that?
Yeah, well, in terms of Twitter, I've been kind of hashtag averse. I find them a little distracting myself. That could be like a generational thing. My own kind of low-level Twitter aversion. I think probably 2 or 3 hashtags should probably be the limit. Like I said, I do tend to find them distracting, and I'm always a little confused. Not being super Twitter focused, I sometimes wonder how many people are actually searching hashtags and using hashtags for as like a means of search. I don't really know what the data is on that. So I wouldn't. My own perspective is that the hashtags are a little distracting, and I'm not sure how useful they are. But again, I'm not a Twitter expert. And in terms of engagement, that's a great question. How do you measure impact? And for an article about like ESG, you could be really making important ESG insights, and you won't get the audience that you would if you had written about a return to the gold standard or a Bitcoin story, for example. Bitcoin is always going to get an audience, but at the same time, you really can't. That audience is not necessarily going to be, the most robust or elite. I guess I'd say. Personally, I find traffic is a raw metric is great. The more hits, the better, just generally. And for a subscription-oriented publication, usually you can do there's some sort of analysis as to how many hits are you going to get, and there's going to be some sort of equation as to how many hits translate into a subscribe, etc. But I think the main metric for me is pickups. If these things are rare, but if a Bloomberg picks it up or the FT picks it up, that's success. Whether nobody else could read it, you may get 200 hits, but if Bloomberg notes it, if Jason Zweig at the Wall Street Journal tweets it, that means it's important, I would guess. But yeah, these metrics, and I think across the board, in the social media age, in digital publishing, I don't know if we've arrived at concrete metrics as to how to measure success. I think like GDP or any of these old economic metrics, these are new phenomena, and I don't think we've quite worked out how we should measure success. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but the more data, the better, generally.
Yep. Can't agree with you more.
Abhishek, can you mention the book that you that's a good book, by the way. I've finished about 3/4 of it. And Paul, any book recommendations? And for the audience, for success, Malgudi Days writer, he was rejected 30-40 times before Malgudi Days was accepted.
Yes, Srinivas. So the book which I recommend, which I had recommended to Srinivas, was the book called The Pyramid Principle from Barbara Minto. I think it is one of the best books for aspiring writers to learn about writing skills, how to structure your thoughts, how to structure your ideas and put it on paper. So Paul, 2 questions. I will combine what just Srinivas said. Number 1, any book recommendations from your side? And number 2, we have a lot of CFA candidates and young charter holders in the audience. So would you recommend any magazines which they should read on a recurring basis, which you think will help in improvising their writing skills, which you really feel that they write well?
Well, first question, I just finished up editing an article about the retirement situation in the United States, and alongside with the coronavirus stuff. I mean, in the United States, we're talking about 25% unemployment is on the horizon. Like that's generally accepted that sometime soon that's what it's going to look like, which is from my perspective, in my realm of experience, this is completely unprecedented. Nobody knows what it means. What the implications are. It's going to be huge. So a contributor wrote something on those, and he recommended this book, Robber Barons. I forget the name of the author, but it's about sort of the Gilded Age and then the fall into the Great Depression. And one of the points he makes that the author kind of builds on in this article is that, there's this awful quote that in bear markets, stocks will return to their, quote, rightful owners. And the point is that, particularly in the United States and in the stock markets in general, if one were at a poker table, it's like the high rollers are playing alongside like the nickel bets. And that kind of creates a certain, a competitive disadvantage. It's like if you're competing with somebody, if you have $5 at a table and you're competing with somebody with, several thousand, that kind of, you're at a disadvantage. The more money, the bigger the pile, generally, the more advantage somebody's going to have, both at placing their bets and matching yours. So yeah, robber barons. That's one that's on my list. And I'm sorry, the second question was
on the different types of magazines one should subscribe.
Oh, different magazines. Economist. I don't know how they do it. That is just one of the strongest publications I've seen. And what I like about it is it gets the economics and the markets and the finance, but it also really works in the geopolitics and the history element. So it's a very kind of comprehensive view. And then in addition to that, I would recommend, it's not a magazine, but the CFA Research Foundation, they publish a lot of stuff. The second generation of behavioral finance by Mir Statman, that came out. I just read that last month, and just a great read. And certainly the Financial Analyst Journal, they've got a Buffett's Alpha, What is Quality? Jason Su, I think, was among the authors of that. So they're always putting stuff out. It's much denser. It's peer-reviewed academic writing, but it's good data and definitely compelling stuff. And finally, I would, I guess, the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg and the Financial Times. Those are the big three that are always worth keeping up to date with. So yeah, those would be my recommendations. And of course, at the same time, you can never read everything out there. So don't try to just stick to some good mainstays, and hopefully you'll catch the important stuff.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for sharing your insights today. It was really very insightful. Request to all members, CFA Society India members, you may claim your professional learning credit by logging into your online professional learning tracking tool. Thank you, audience, for participating in today's webinar. The webinar comes to a close now. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.